Yeah.
Oh, and say he has to take
Okay, we are on page 544. We're on page 544. We're starting a new book, the book of Vayikra. Right, we finished Shmos last week, and now Vayikra in 544. So it begins Vayikra Moshe V'adaber Hashem Elav. He calls out to Moshe, and God says to him. If you look closely at the first word there, you'll notice that the last letter in that word, the font is different. The first letters to that word, the font is probably around 16, and then the last letter, it's about 10. Notice Vayikra, the Hebrew, the first word on the top of 444. When we get not, I don't mean the title, but the first word, like this, okay? Right there. Okay, so that Vayikra, you notice the letter Aleph is small. It's like that in the Torah also, and it's on purpose. And the commentaries want to know why. Right? Every once in a while in the Torah, you'll have something like that. A letter is missing, a letter is larger, a letter is smaller, a letter is separate, and it always has a reason. And you can find this in every Torah that there is. And in this case, it's the Midrash says that the reason is that when Moshe wrote down the Torah, he was like God's secretary, right? When it says God wrote the Torah, God didn't physically write the Torah. He told it to Moshe, and this is him telling it. So he says, he calls up to Moshe, and he tells him the following. So he begins by saying, and he called to Moshe. But the word he called Moshe, right, it has that one letter, small. And if you take that letter off, the word doesn't mean called anymore. It means he happened across. In other words, like I happened to be going to the mall, and as I was walking through, I don't know, whatever, Sears, which doesn't exist anymore. I was walking through Sears. I happened to cross one of you. I saw one of you. I didn't plan to see you. I'm glad to see you, but I had no intention to see you. Right? It just happened to be. When I say Vayikra, I called, means I have specific intention to have an interaction with you. So the original, God tells Moshe, I'm coming to see you. I want an appointment, right? I'm coming. I'm coming to see you. I'm calling you specifically. Moshe says, who am I that you should call me? You happen to come across me, right? I'm not that important. Why does he say that? Because if we have, in the story of Bilam, who is the non-Jewish prophet that we'll talk about in probably around 10 to 12 weeks, there's a parsha about him. And in that case, where it says this, it tells us that, that God happened across Bilam. In other words, it just happened to be that God interacted with Bilam. Right? I can't say I know exactly what those words mean, that he happened across Bilam, because God's everywhere all the time. Right? And God happened to contact Moshe. But it's in the case of Moshe, it's showing a dignity, it's showing a respect that God has for Moshe because of his life. With Bilam, it's showing a lack of respect. Bilam was a criminal. Right? He used prophecy for financial gain. Right? So therefore, it says, it uses an expression that God's not going to take his time to go looking for him. And if I happen to see him, it's how it goes. But Moshe was somebody of importance. And Moshe says, who am I? I'm not anybody extraordinary. I'm just like anyone else. So let's take the aleph out. Let's use the same word that you happen to cross me, just like you happen to cross Bilam. And God says, no, I want it to say what I'm saying. I want people to know that I have this respect for you because of who you are. So Moshe couldn't get himself to do it, so he made the aleph small. He made it smaller so that without the aleph, it means he came across him. With the aleph, it means that he specifically went out of his way to find him. And Moshe wants to say that even though it's true, but out of humility, Moshe couldn't acknowledge the fact that God would consider him something special. And this is just an example of the humility of Moshe. You see, one has to understand humility is a very important trait that we should have. Really, you can only be humble if you are special, right? Because otherwise you're just foolish, right? If you think that you're the greatest baseball player, and because of it you're arrogant about it, and you talk about it, and you're really not very good at all, you're just stupid, right? But if you are the greatest baseball player, and you go around treating people badly because you're better than them and you're a higher level than them, that is a lack of humility. That's a bad character trait. Moshe was one of the greatest human beings of history. He was a great person. He wasn't perfect, but he was a great person, and he worked on himself to be as good as he could be, as he felt he could be. And he was the kind of person who was worthy of having an extraordinary relationship with God. And therefore, God wanted to have that relationship with him and wanted us to know this. Moshe had the ability that he was known not only as a great person, but also as the most humble of all people. Now, you have to realize Moshe wrote that himself. God says to Moshe, I want you to write down that Moshe is the most humble person in the history of mankind. And he wrote it. There will never be a person as humble as Moshe. So you first understand that in order for him to be humble, he had to be great. So he was great, but he was the most humble. And they always ask the question, how can he say that? How could a person be humble and say, I'm the most humble person in the world? So a true humble person can do that, because a true humble person knows who he is or she is. You know your worth. You know who you are. So, and you know that you can excel at something. I can be the most intelligent person in the world. I can be the kindest person in the world, as long as I realize that it doesn't make me better than you. Because while I might be the most intelligent, you might be the kindest. And I can't hold a candle to you, and you can't to me. So we have to realize each other has these great worths. So that, and humility teaches us you can be great. You can be the number one most amazing person in the world, but it doesn't make you better than anyone else. And there's a famous story about Rabbi Avram Rothman, who was a very, very famous, renowned sort of chief rabbi of England years ago. And he later moved to Israel. But while he lived in England, there's one of the occasions, which we've had many times in Europe, where the government tried to outlaw shechita, ritual slaughtering. They said it was inhumane, and they tried to outlaw it. So they had a court case, and the lawyer defending shechita on behalf of the Jewish community brought an expert witness. The rabbi is the expert witness. He knows, right? So they comes in, and the judge wants him to identify himself. So he says, I'm Rabbi Avram Rothman. I am the foremost authority in the world on the laws of ritual slaughtering, and in general of laws, Jewish laws. I am one of the greatest rabbis of our time. And the judge looks at him and says, Rabbi, aren't you supposed to be humble? And he said, I took an oath. I swore, so I have to tell the truth. But that is totally logical, because he can't brag or think he's better than someone else, but he can know who he is. He can know that there is nobody in the world who knows this information as well as I do, but it doesn't make me better than you. It doesn't make me it doesn't give me the ability to knock you down. Right? That's the point, and that's why it's here, is to teach us this lesson. That it says why it says Vayikra with the small aleph, because Moshe wants us to know that on the one hand, he wanted to hide how great he was, and God says that's not how you're humble. You're humble by being honest about who you are, but not thinking you're greater than anyone else. You might be greater at this, but you're not a greater person than anyone else. So then it says that Vayikra Moshe, he called out to Moshe, Vayadaber Hashem alav, and God spoke to him. Ohel Moed Lemor. Now this is the first time we see this. Ohel Moed is the Mishkan, the traveling temple, right? That we just saw for the last 5 weeks. Them making it, building it. Now they have it, and the purpose of it, the Torah tells us, is that God wanted that we should have this as a place where we can go to be with God. God's with us everywhere, but it became clear to him that people wanted a place for him where they could go to commune with God. Even though you can commune with God here in this room, in your kitchen, in your car, and in fact, many people do. They do that. They speak to God wherever they are. But there's also people like a place that they can go to. So God made this. It's called the Ohel Moed. Literally means the tent of meeting, the tent of gathering. They had this tent where they gathered, and they would go talk to God. So it says that God spoke to him from that, and it says that that God's voice was extremely powerful, very loud. But outside of the Ohel Moed, you couldn't hear it. You could only hear it inside. That's why, because he he purposely made a miracle like this in order so that when you were inside the Ol Moed and you were communing with God at that level, so then you could hear God very clearly. When you went outside of it, you couldn't hear him at all. That was miraculous. It was a miracle, and it was done purposely in order to express that God's voice is not like a human voice. God, in the way that we understand it, God has no voice. God has no voice box. He has no mouth. He has no physical presence. God is something that we really can't understand what God is or who God is. But we do know that he's not human, and he has no body. So whenever God assumes any type of corporal form, and not form, but corporal activity, like God's never going to be a human. He's never going to come in human form. But if God speaks to us, right, that's a physical thing. So whenever that happens, there's always a miracle tied into it, so that we realize it's very different than us. So in this case, if I would speak very loudly inside of a tent, and you stood right outside the tent, you could hear me. But in the case of God, you couldn't. You had to be in the tent. And that's why I use this long expression, that God spoke to Moshe from the tent, saying, and then he tells him, the whole next section is dealing with what God's telling him, which is the section of what we call karbonos. Karbonos is a Hebrew word for sacrifice. Sacrifice to most of us sounds like a very savage, uncivilized thing. That we'd actually take an object, an animal, a human, depending on what kind of sacrifice you're talking about, and waste it. That's what sacrifice means, wasting. I'm not going to use it. I'm going to just waste it for God. Right? That's not at all what sacrifice is in Hebrew. In fact, the word sacrifice is not the correct translation of the word we have in Hebrew called karbonot, or carbon in singular. Totally different word. The word sacrifice is to waste something. I'm going to take, a dollar, and they say that, what does it say? They have this Yiddish joke. They say that you have how do they say in Yiddish, 3 coins in the fountain? They say it's verfallene Geld, like lost money. You threw the money in the fountain, you dummy, right? It's the same idea. That a sacrifice, right, is not wasting things in our belief. That's how the rest of the world sees it. We use the word carbon. Carbon comes from the root word karev, to get close, to bring something close. And what you're trying to do is to increase your closeness of your relationship with God, either because you did something wrong and you want to atone for it, or because you had something good happen to you and you want to express your feelings to God for causing that, or something bad happened to you and you're turning to God for solace and peace, or you would like certain things, like we want our crops to grow, right? So we have certain things that God tells us that we do, that we offer these. It will bring us closer to him, so that we are deserving of these things. It's not magic. Like when you watch the Tarzan movies and you had all of these native people in Africa inside of a cave, right, all sweaty and bowing down to this god with fire coming out of it and throwing a woman into it, right? That is so foreign to us. Our idea is that let's use an example of a sin offering. It's the most easiest one to describe. So a person by mistake sins. So he wants to atone for his sin and get rid of the blemish on his soul, so to speak. So he goes in the days of the temple, and he goes outside the city of Jerusalem, and he buys a cow. Then he has to walk with this cow through the city of Jerusalem to get to, you can imagine, through the old city. He's walking through the cow to get to the temple, which is in the center of the old city. And everybody knows why he's walking around with a cow, because he did something wrong, right? Everybody sees it. So it's a little humiliating. Not a lot, because we always try to better ourselves. Everybody makes mistakes. So and it's expensive. A cow's not, no matter what generation it is, cows aren't cheap, right? Maybe now they're thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars. Back then, maybe it was $50, but it's still $50 was a lot of money. So you'd spend all that money. You'd have to walk with the animal through the city, and then you go into the temple, and you give the animal to the Kohen. In this case, the Kohen is a middle representative between God and us, and the Kohen slaughters the animal. And the blood and different parts of the animal are put in different places, and then, for the most part, you will eat the part of the animal. It's like a barbecue. You will eat part of it, and the Kohen will have part of it. And in some cases, your friends will have, or your family will have, all depending on which sacrifice it is. Because you are not sacrificing, giving up and wasting something. You are taking this animal. When they kill the animal and you look at that, you say, but for the grace of God, this could be me. That animal looks like me. It has a heart like I have a heart. It has blood like I have blood. In other words, that in a world of total justice, an animal world, if I do something wrong, I should be killed. Don't forget kindness. If God makes a world and he says, I'm creating you, all right, and you owe me, and what is you have to do what I tell you, then you don't do what he tells them, the logical response is you no longer live. You disappear because you're brought in to do. Now, that's not, I'm simplifying it, of course, and I'm making it in a way that's not real. It's not, we don't live in a world of justice. But if we did, so a person now offers a sacrifice and said, I did this thing wrong. God in his mercy is allowing me to erase it, that I can move on, even though I did something wrong, and I can atone for it, and I can become the person I was before and advance. In fact, advance even better because I did something wrong. But he's allowing me to do it. But if it wasn't for that, look at this. That animal could be me. I could be dead. It looks like me. It's blood and hearts and liver, even though it's not exactly the same. And then what do is we don't waste it. We eat it. This was killed in a holy place, right? And it's consumed in a holy place. It helps me intellectually and emotionally become holy, right? I feel this, that I'm becoming holy, and I start acting that way. When a person is in an environment, right, the environment affects you. So it doesn't force you, it affects you. It's up to you to do it, right? It's not up to you eat the sacrifice doesn't immediately make you a different person. You have to want it to. Otherwise, you're just eating a hamburger, right? But if you wanted to, so the sacrifices, whatever reason that they're given, I just gave you one example of a sin offering, but there's, like I said, there's ones when you have something good happen to you, and when a person gets into a car accident and they come out fine. So they would offer what they call a carbon toda, a thank you offering to God for, I was in this bad situation and I didn't get hurt. Right? So that's another type of offering. There's also a communal offering that the entire Jewish people offer every morning, afternoon, and evening. Well, after morning and afternoon, they would offer these sacrifices. So that's what sacrifices are. They are not at all what we think. They are not at all taking an animal, putting it in pain, killing it, throwing it away, or throwing it in a fire. It's just not the way it's done.
So I think today prayer replace.
Well,
prayer
King David says that.
or-
Yeah, King David says that today prayers replace sacrifices.
Because, you know, if you have an accident.
Right. But we use the same words. There's a shacharis
Right.
offering and there's shacharis prayer. There's a mincha offering and a mincha prayer. There's a prayer of thanks, just like there is a sacrifice of thanks. There's a Passover offering. We have a Passover Seder. We don't have an offering today, right? So these are all examples of sacrifices. And this whole section is going to deal with all different types of sacrifices. One of the other things that you're going to learn about the sacrifices and some of the specifics. For instance, whenever a sacrifice was offered, there was always salt put on the altar. Now this is why when people, today there's many reasons why when we make hamotzi and you're right at your house, you always put a little bit of salt on the bread. You notice people do that?
But what does the salt symbolize?
Well, I'm about to say. So the person puts some salt on their bread, right? You see that all the time. The legal reason is because in ancient times, bread was flour and water with no taste. So you would add salt to it so it would taste better. So then you made a blessing. You wanted it to taste good. But there's a deeper meaning, which is all sacrifices were offered with salt. No matter what it was, there was always salt was a part of it. And therefore, we say that our table, when we're eating at our table, is also holy. It's a holy act. Yeah, we can eat like animals and just eat whatever we want as much as we want with absolutely no thought other than satiating ourselves. Or we can invite poor people to our home. We can eat food that is kosher rather than not kosher, right? Raising the level. We can say blessings over the food. We can talk with people over a meal, right? We do all of these things are spiritual acts and are acts that are beyond just the physical eating, which makes a meal a special thing. So to remind us of this idea, that one of the symbols is the salt at our table. That you should always have salt on your table, symbolizing this concept, just like there was always salt on the altar, showing us that the altar and your table are the same thing. That's the same word, right? So that's the same thing, right?
That's
Both
why
cases.
we wash our hands.
No, there's different reasons.
Nothing to do.
They wash their hands, but that's not why. They did. They washed their feet. You don't do that. Right? You don't do that. So here you have that sacrifice, and how we do it today. But in many of the idea of the salt, why did they have salt? Right? I could have told you why we have salt, because they use salt. So why did they use salt? Like, why did God command that you have to have salt? There were some very interesting commands. One is that every sacrifice had to have salt. Another one is they couldn't have honey or sweetener, right, at all on the sacrifice. So let's talk about the salt first, why that is. And it's repeated throughout this whole chapter. There's a famous medrash that says that when, in the beginning of time, when the world was created, it says that, that God created the sun and he created the moon. And one point it says that God separated the waters between the lower waters and the upper waters, right? The waters in the heaven, right, that become rain, and the water that's in the lake, right? Upper water and lower water. So the Medrash says that the lower water complained to God. They said, there's no difference between us and the upper water. We're both water, right? It's not like we're different. So why do the water up there get to be close to you and we're far away? We're in the mud. There, it's up in heaven. Why did you do that to us? So God says, you're right. I owe you one. So every time a sacrifice is offered, it's going to be symbolized that this discussion by there'll be salt on the water. And the water from the ground that we have has salt in it, salt water. And whenever a sacrifice is offered, they will offer it with the salt that comes from you, so that you will also play a role in the spirituality. So remember again, this is a medrash. No one tells you that this is literally true. It's not literally true. It is a method of education. The medrash is used to teach us certain things, right? They teach us a lesson. The way we remember it is by telling us things in a way that's absurd or a story, and that way you remember it. I can tell you some very absurd midrashim, but you'll never forget. And the lesson that it teaches you, you'll never forget because of it, rather than just telling you the lesson, which by the time you leave, you'll forget. Right? That's how humans are. So in this case, the Medrash is teaching us this lesson, that the water went to complain to God, so to speak, right? Even though it didn't really complain to God, didn't have a mouth. But the point is that it was trying to show that the water of this world, physical substance in this world, has spiritual potential. So from this we can understand that everything in this world has spiritual potential. There's a Kabbalistic concept that within every object there are sparks or seeds of holiness. And it's our job to release those into the world. So for instance, if you have an apple, inside of the apple is not only an apple, right? It's exactly as you know it, but it also has within it these sparks or seeds of holiness within it. And when we make a blessing on the apple, and we don't steal the apple, we pay for the apple, and the energy we get from the apple we do good things with, or we give the apple to a poor person. When we do something with this apple beyond just consuming it, we have now released the sparks of holiness from the apple, and it enters the world. Right? This is at a Kabbalistic level, of course, but it's part of everything in the physical world has this potential. And the potential is only released through human intervention. Because you as a person eat this apple, and you make a blessing on the apple, you cause it to happen. It's not that it's going to happen on its own. You do it. So therefore, when you say a blessing with forethought, with true understanding of what you're saying and why you're saying it before you eat something, it makes a difference because it affects that holiness that comes from the apple. When you use the apple or the orange or the steak for a positive purpose, you have something wonderful happen to you, right? So you go and you have a steak. Right? It could be that you're having a steak because something good happened to you because you want to celebrate, and it has absolutely nothing to do with any thanking God or being happy for another reason. Or you can you can have a spiritual aspect tied into it. It doesn't take away from the steak. It adds to this concept of the holiness. So that's what it's referring to. That's the basis of the salt. There's also another very interesting, thing I'll tell you about. It's a little out of the parsha, but I found it amazing, and it's a piece of Talmud. The Talmud has many different parts to it. One part is strictly legal, where it talks about law, and it argues law back and forth until they come up with a conclusion as to what the law really is. So someone will have a misconception, and someone else will start arguing with them, and they'll prove, that I can prove from this part of the Torah that you're wrong, and the person says, no, I'm proving your proof is wrong, and then you have to find another proof, and that's how the Talmud comes up with law, right? By using your mind to be able to decipher and to compare and contrast things. That's one part. Another part is stories. It's called the Agadata. And these stories are like Medrash in that they're there to teach us a lesson, usually an ethical lesson, not a legal lesson. Sometimes they'll tell you a story for legal purposes, how somebody practiced, but usually it's an ethical lesson. So there's also historical stories which also have an ethical lesson. So one of the historical things there's this one rabbi who has a series of questions, and he tells these questions were basically that there were interactions between the Greek philosophers and the rabbis of the Talmud. They lived at the same time. And the Greek philosophers saw themselves as intellectuals. The rabbis of the Talmud were intellectuals. So there'd be a lot of interacting. And they lived in Israel, right? That's why I have the whole story of Hanukkah. The Greeks lived in Israel. So it says one point where they ask a question to Rabbi Akiva. The Greek philosophers say to him, what's greater, the acts of man or the acts of God? So Rabbi Akiva says, well, I can't really tell you, but come back next week and I'll show you. So they come back the next week, and Rabbi Akiva is holding a stalk of wheat in one hand and a cake in the other. And they asked him, which would you like to eat? They said, the cake. So he said, then you see the acts of man are greater than the acts of God. Because the acts of God give us the potential, gives us the product, but it's man who makes the cake. It's man who takes what God gives us and does something wonderful with it. It is. So they say to him, when salt spoils, what do you salt it with? That's the next question they ask him. So he says, with the afterbirth of a mule. And they say mules can't have an afterbirth. They're unable to have children, mules, right? They're a donkey and a horse. They can't have children. None of them. Mules cannot reproduce. So he said that his answer to them is the afterbirth of a mule. And they say back to him, well, mules don't have afterbirths. So that's the end of the story. So what is it telling us? So they're asking this question: when salt spoils, what do you salt it with? So salt can't spoil, right? Salt is a preservative, right? In ancient times, you didn't have refrigerators. You wanted something to stay around for a while. You salted it. You salted meat. You salted fish. That's how it was. It wouldn't get spoiled. It was a preservative. So when preservatives spoil, what do you salt it with? So we have to understand that this shows you the greatness of the people in the Talmud. What is salt made of? Salt is a unique object, but it's made of two things: of sodium and chlorine, right? Sodium and chlorine. Sodium or chlorine are poisonous. If you would ingest sodium or chlorine, you will die. But if you put it together, you create a new substance called salt, which you must have to live. You have it in your body. You have to have it in order to eat things. Salt is a necessity. But the two things within salt are poison, right? So now I'm going to tell you what the Greeks are really asking. The Greeks say, God made a deal with you Jews. You keep the Torah, I'll take care of you, right? You didn't keep the Torah. The Jews stopped keeping the Torah. We broke it. So God's not taking care of you. You got sent out of Israel. The first temple was destroyed. You're living among the non-Jews. It's game over. That's it. You had a business deal. You didn't do your side. God's not doing his side, right? When salt spoils, what do you salt it with? Right? When you broke your covenant of salt, because God made a covenant of salt. That's what the expression is in the Torah with us. He made a covenant of salt, meaning two opposites. God and man are opposites. Man is physical with some spirituality, and God is totally spiritual. We're incompatible. But God makes a deal with us. I'll take care of you if you do what I tell you to do, and I'll take care of you. Right? So these two opposites can now make a covenant. They make a business deal. Right? We do our side, God does his side. So as long as we do our side, God will do his. We stop doing ours, God stopped doing his. So it's over. So the Greeks are saying, now what are you Jews going to do? Salt is spoiled. There's no more. The covenant's over. What are you going to do? So they say, we will save it with the afterbirth of a mule. What is an afterbirth of a mule? So a mule is a donkey and a horse, right? that has a child, and it's a mule. So those two, in Jewish literature, a horse is a sign of arrogance. Like king wore a horse. It's a very proud animal. It was a symbol for us. If we're using it, and animals have symbols. So the symbol for us, whenever you see a horse in our literature, it's often referring to the character trait of arrogance, and it's just using a symbol. A donkey is stubborn. It's known for being stubborn. So, and there are two forces that we contend with in our lives. We have what's called gaiva and taiva. Gaiva is arrogance. Every one of us has to struggle with humility and arrogance. It's part of who we are. We also have taiva. Taiva means sensual desire. We want to feel good, whatever way that is. Intimacy, food, whatever it is, we want to feel good. And that's a struggle we all have. Because if you do everything you want that makes you feel good, you will die. You'll overeat. You'll catch diseases. You'll do all types of things that are detrimental to you, right? That will corrupt you. If all you'll do is satiate yourself, that's all you do. So therefore, we have a struggle with this, right? And we have a struggle with arrogance. So we have a struggle with the horse and the donkey. They go together, they create a mule. So when Jews are horses and donkeys, when Jews are arrogant fools, and Jews are living their life to only do what they want to do, which means they've broken the covenant, like the Greeks said, what will save them? The afterbirth of the mule. The afterbirth, meaning they get together and they have a child. That child will save them. Rabbi Akiva says back to them, you know what will save the Jews? Our children. Our children will come back. We messed it up, but our children have hope, and they will bring it back. So they said, but a mule doesn't have an afterbirth. There are no children. So he says back, the last line, which is, who says salt can spoil? Which is, you're right. If the Jews really were donkeys and horses, where we really were so arrogant and so sensually desirable that we couldn't get beyond it, we couldn't have children. But we only think we're that way. Because salt can't spoil. God is never going to throw us out. We might break the rules, but God is always there for us, and we're always going to come back. And it's our children will bring us back. Maybe I won't do it, but my children will bring us back. And I have children because I'm not really a donkey, or I'm not really a horse. I'm not really so arrogant that I can't get beyond it. I'm just acting like that now. And I'll suddenly come to the realization I can't be that way. So we can gain a lot from this story, right? But one thing you certainly gained is the intelligence and the depth of both the Greeks and the rabbis. They were enormously advanced in their thought process, because this was only one of like 30 examples that one after another in the Talmud. Like they have a whole chapter of these where the Greeks are arguing with the rabbis, and it sounds like they're a bunch of children. Like when salt spoils, what do you salt it with? It's like, you know, Jack and Joe went up the hill, you know, it fell down. So like that's what it sounds like, but it's so deep, right? It's got very little to do with what I was saying, but it's just, I wanted to convey that story because it shows us really the depth. The only connector is salt, right? But the depth behind it. So the idea is that every sacrifice has salt. So why can't it have honey or sugar or sweetening? Why not? You want your sacrifice to taste good, right? What's wrong with that? So it says that when you eat the sacrifice, God wants you to taste the sacrifice. He doesn't want you to change the taste. So then why put out salt? Salt also does that. And salt has to be on the sacrifice, right? And if you can't put honey because it changes the taste, doesn't salt change the taste? So the rabbis say, no, it doesn't. It enhances the taste. The purpose of the salt is to bring out the taste of the sacrifice. The purpose of sweetener is to mask the taste of the sacrifice. When it comes to sacrifices, when our experience with spirituality, we want the genuine, unique idea. That's what we want. We want the real thing. We don't want to say, I know better than God. God says I have to eat this lamb. Well, I don't like lamb, so I'll put some sauce on it. Then I'll eat it. Right? But I'm not smarter than God. God knows much more than this, but much deeper message here. So God says you can't put the sweetener on, right? You can't. You don't know better than me. I'm telling you, this is what you need to do to better yourself, to help yourself, to get where you need to go. So therefore, you can't put the sugar in it because that changes what I wrote. But you must put the salt in it because that enhances what I've told you. It doesn't change it; it enhances it. So that's why you have some of these rules here. Now, I'll give you a bit of a description of how things really worked with the sacrifices, and this is really what happens. I did the beginning where the person has to schlep the cow through the city, and he goes up the stairs to the Temple Mount, just like we have. Like you see them in Jerusalem. You go up the stairs to the Temple Mount. You go into the temple with the cow, and it's almost like you go inside and you're standing at a railing almost, and the Kohen's on the inside and you're on the outside, because the Kohen is sanctified and he works in the holy atmosphere, and we're regular people. We're not sanctified. We have potential for holiness, but we're not sanctified in that way. So we stand on the outside, and the Kohen acts on our behalf. He's our, sort of like our arms. That's what he is. You hand him over the cow. Then now the Kohen has already prepared himself. When he comes in the morning, first thing is all Kohanim wear uniforms. I mentioned before, the only people you find in the Torah that it's mentioned wear uniforms are Kohanim. It doesn't mention anything about the army or the military wearing uniforms, and it does talk about the military. And the reason is because when you're going to go offer the sacrifice, the Kohen is not an individual. The Kohen is an extension of you and of God. It makes no difference which Kohen you give it to. Right? You don't go to say, I don't want you, I want Joe Kohen to do it. No, they all look the same because when they're doing their job, they're not individuals anymore. Right, which is like in the army. When you go to why do you wear a uniform in the army? Because they don't want people thinking for themselves. They want you to do what you're told to do, or you're going to die. Right? You need someone who understands military strategy to tell you, an 18-year-old kid who's going out to war, what to do, or you're not coming back. I want you to come back, so I'm going to tell you what to do. So they do everything they can to take away that person's individuality so that he's part of the team. He is uniform. So he wears a uniform. Right, so he'll take commands. The Kohen is the same idea. There is no individual Kohen. You don't go there and say, I want to give Michael Deverett my sacrifice. No, you can't do that. Whatever Kohen comes is who you give. Right? And that's why they dress, they all had their head shaved, they were all barefoot, they all wore uniforms. There was no distinguishing way. And they had no, remember I said before, they can't have distinguishing marks. They couldn't look different. If they had one eyebrow or one ear missing or one arm longer than the other, right, that made them look different. They had to all look the same.
What did the uniform look like?
Well, we'll see it in a couple of weeks. I actually have pictures of it. Oh. They're very grand. And the Kohen Gadol's one is extremely. But there's silver ones and there's white ones and there's gold ones, all depending on the act that they were doing. And they were constantly changing their clothes, constantly changing their uniforms, and washing and preparing. So here now the Kohen comes in the morning. The first thing the Kohen does, we'll learn, is he takes out the garbage. I always tell this on Erev Yom Kippur because it says that the first thing the Kohen has to do is he has to clear off the ashes from the altar from the sacrifices that burnt in the nighttime. Because you would put one on before dark and it could burn through the night. You had ashes there. So the first thing I do is take out the ashes. I always say the stories. You can imagine this guy gets up, he comes in, he washes his hands, he washes his feet, he's all shaved, he's wearing a uniform, he's in this holy environment. The Levium are all standing on the steps as he's walking up singing holy songs. He's in this really inspired thing, and the first thing he has to do is take out the garbage. Right? Yeah, no question. And he has to change his clothes because he can't take out the garbage in his uniform because he's leaving the building. He has to change his clothes to go out and to take care of this. Right? It's called Trumas Hadeshin. cleaning off what's left behind before the day starts. He had to, whoever Kohen it was would have to do that. And I always tell the story how, like, here it is on Erev Yom Kippur, and we're all sitting at our table having our last meal, and I'm there with my children and my grandchildren, and it's like, and I'm going to come in and give the big speech of the year at Kol Nidre, and I've worked on it for months, and I've got, I'm all set, and I've been working on myself, and it's a very special time, and I'm giving blessings to all my kids, and as I'm about to walk out the door, my wife says, "Take out the garbage." Right? And I have to remember that I put my pants on one leg at a time, just like everybody else. I might be giving the biggest talk of my life, and it's Erev Yom Kippur, and things are going to be amazing, but I'm a regular guy. Right? I take out the garbage. That's what the Kohen's message is. The Kohen has to know that. So that's how it starts. And then, basically, throughout there are two things going on. You have the required sort of national-based sacrifices, the morning sacrifice, the afternoon sacrifice. They had to be given every day on behalf of the Jewish nation, not on behalf of an individual. So you have one group of Kohanim are doing these. You have another group who's basically the retail section. They're dealing with the public. So a guy comes in, I forgot it was Shabbos, and I turned on the light, and I want to atone for it. So he comes in with his cow, and that Kohen takes it in the back, and they slaughters the cow, and the person can see it from where he is, right? And there's women there. The women can see it from there where they are. And they see this happening, and the Kohen puts some blood on the north corner and the south corner. They have all different rituals that they did, and all have very deep meaning, and each sacrifice was different as to what they did with different parts of the body of the cow and the blood from the cow. And then they would cook it. What was left would be cooked. Some of it would be given to the Kohen, because this is a Kohen has to make a living. He can't work. He's in the temple all the time working on behalf of the Jewish people, so he can't have a job. Right? The Kohen did not have the ability to have a regular job. They worked for the people by birth. That was their job. So every time you offered a sacrifice, a portion of it would go to the Kohen. You had many things that would go to the Kohen. A Kohen could be quite wealthy. If they worked hard, they could be very wealthy. Yeah.
So I know Kohens can't be around big bodies, but it's funny that they're able to slaughter animals.
Because it's not humans.
Okay,
right? And there's an amazing story in the Talmud that talks about people who have lost touch with the real purpose of things. It tells a story that sometimes when people come with sacrifices, the Kohanim were very zealous people, not jealous, but zealous, very, very hardworking, very, very diligent in their beliefs, did things fast, right? So it says that somebody came with a sacrifice, and they started a fight. Who gets to offer the sacrifice? An argument. And one of the Kohanim stabbed another one, right? And the one who was stabbed is dying on the floor, right? He's bleeding out on the floor. And all the other Kohanim come around, and they're trying to help him. And the father of the Kohen who was stabbed goes up and checks his son, and he says, "Oh, thank God he's alive, so he's not tuma. Tuma means that a dead, like a Kohen can't stand there. He has to leave." In other words, he's not even thinking about the pain that his son's going through. He's not thinking about this crazy Kohen running with a knife who, not on purpose, stabbed him, but because he's running to go do it, to beat him, to get to the sacrifice. He stabbed him, almost kills him, right? And nobody cares about that. They only care that we have to continue with the ritual. We've lost the heart. We only have the ritual. That's what the story is telling you. But it shows you that in the temple, there was no problem that animals are being killed because they don't have a higher soul. They have a soul, a life force, but they don't have a spiritual soul. Like we have what we call a nefesh. It's a life force. That's what makes you breathe. And you have a neshama, which is a spirit. That's your relationship with God, right? That whole animals don't have that. They only have a nefesh. They have a life force, right? That's why that animals don't have free will, because they can't think like we do. An animal can choose, but it can't have free will. It can say an animal might like this food rather than that food. That's choosing, but it can't like look at a piece of art and say, and understand on a higher level what that art is saying to it, or it likes one over another, or in many cases when your dog is nice to you, it's really just Pavlovian that you feed it, so it's nice to you. And if you If you would threaten it, it would never forget and would growl at you every time you come, even though it's your dog. It's not. It doesn't have a higher thought level. They do things, right? You know, a dog. Like I have a brother who's a vet. He tells me stories all the time about it. Dogs can save people, right? But they're not saving you because they love you. They're saving you because you take care of them, right? It's not with a human being that's demeaning. You know, if another human being only cares that I'm alive because as long as I'm alive, I'm giving him money. So that's sad, right? But an animal is not sad. An animal doesn't have that, right?
Well, what if a person didn't have the ability to purchase or to bring the assigned korban?
So then they have bought a cheaper.
There are different korban that
Yes,
you could do?
it says in here that a poor person brought a bird instead of a cow. Birds were cheaper. If they couldn't afford a bird, they brought flour. So everybody could do it. So, but that's the idea is that so a Kohen could kill an animal without any repercussion. But if a human would die there, all the Kohanim would have to leave. And that story, by the way, I don't know if it's actually a true story, but it's in the Talmud to teach us the lesson to not allow ritual to be our goal. It's the heart in the ritual. It's like it says, we read a Haftorah on every fast day in the afternoon, and it says, the prophet says that God tells him that God doesn't want your blood. You know, when you fast, you have the Talmud uses the expression that you have less blood and less fat because your body is consuming it. So he says, God says, I don't want your fat, I don't want your blood, I want your heart. That's what it says. In other words, on a fast day, we don't eat. And that our goal is not to feel the pain. Our goal is to use it to bring us closer to God. I want your heart. If you're going to fast today, but because you want to be a better person, right, or you want to thank God for saving us in the story of Purim, so you're fasting today, then it's your feeling that I want. I want you to express your feeling, right, through this. I'm not looking for you to be in pain. God has no interest in us in being in pain. That's not why we fast. And we're so weak today. Our bodies are so weak that we can't hardly imagine this. It's almost like I'm making this up, that we could fast in Yom Kippur and you could ignore the pain, just that you're doing it for the right reason and you're dedicated to God and you want to be a better person and you're thinking about it. For us, the pain is there, right? You can hardly, some of us can't function because of the pain. Some of us stay in bed all day in Yom Kippur because we can't take the pain. We have, but that's a new thing. If you look in our writings, you can see that the Jews a couple hundred years ago fasted for many, many different reasons. They fasted if there was trouble in the community. They fasted if there wasn't enough rain. They have people who fasted every Monday and Thursday just to be better people. But how does it make you a better person? If I would fast every Monday and Thursday, I would waste every Monday and Thursday. I'd end up just walking around all day because I wouldn't be thinking straight. I'd be in pain and I would be tired. But their bodies were stronger than ours, so it was different. And so that's what they refer to. So now the Kohen does that. Now Kohanim did not work all the time. There were much too many Kohanim. You had what they called they were on call. So you had certain months that this family would be called into the temple. It was always the same time. Like you knew when you were coming. And within the family could be hundreds of people, right? They start out from one, but you could be great-great-great-grandchildren. They're all Kohanim. So that family would be called in, and they even didn't work all the time. You don't work 24 hours a day. So they had called mishmaros, which meant guards. They had guard duty, where they had to be on call. So they were in the temple a certain number of hours. Each, like a group of 6 of the Kohanim or 10 of the Kohanim would be in there for 2 hours, and then another group would come for 2 hours, and another group would come for 2 hours. And then that entire group would only come for a number of weeks, and then another group would come, right? So it shows you a lot why Kohan, in general, would live in Jerusalem, because they had to have access to the temple. They had to be paid considerably because they didn't work all year, right? They didn't. It wasn't like they could have a farm. They had to be there. Like you can imagine, it's like if you get called to jury duty every year, and for 2 months, it's not going to do well for your career. If every year you get called in like that for 2 months, especially if you're a self practitioner, you have your own business, you're not going to get very far. That's what the Kohanim were like. So the Kohanim would get paid well, And in fact, when you go to Jerusalem, and they will sometimes show you excavations of old homes in Jerusalem, the really nice ones that you see, like there's one of them in the old city that had like 6 or 7 mikvahs in it, and clearly it had like 5 or 6 areas or like bathrooms, and they had like 10 bedrooms. Like, who would have a house like that in the first century, or even before the first century? A Kohen would, because Kohen had money. They would, some of them were very wealthy, because they would have their money, they'd invest their money, they would use their money for purposes, and then some of them could do real well with it. Other ones would just spend their money, and they were middle class. But Kohanim had these jobs. It was part of the privilege of being a Kohen. On the one hand, being a Kohen is a privilege. On the other hand, it's not much of a privilege, because you can't be anything but a Kohen. Right? You can't choose to not be a Kohen. You're born into it. But it was considered a privilege. It's like being born into royalty. Right? If you have a country where the king and queen run the country, and you're born into royalty, you don't have a choice. You're not going to go out and do something. Right? Like, you abdicate the crown, it's going to be in history forever. It's so rare that people would do such a thing. You're part of the royalty. So the Kohanim are royalty, and that was their job. So now, it's interesting is that all of the authorities tell us that when the third temple is built, we will have sacrifices again, except the Rambam. The Rambam doesn't believe that we'll have sacrifices again. And the Rambam also, very interestingly, says that he believed, if I understand it correctly, that the reason that God gives us sacrifices, and we spend the next 5 weeks talking about them, right, that it was so significant, it's such an important part of the Torah and of Jewish life, was that the Rambam said it was that because the human being is born with a desire for blood, and that the pagans, right, they did these sacrifices in very violent ways. And, all these stories of taking a virgin and throwing her into a volcano. They did this kind of stuff. Like, this is real. It's not made up. Maybe not that example, but they did things. And the Rambam says that human beings have a bloodlust inside of us, and we can learn to take care, to temper it. It can be sophisticated. We can work on ourselves, but it's there. That's why he says that's why we like to eat meat. We don't, we like that taste. It's part of who we are. He says, and that God gave us sacrifices in order to satiate that, because the pagans did it in a wrong way. So God gave us the ability to do it in the right way. Right? Cannibals do it in the wrong way. We do it in the right way. But he says, but after the Messiah comes, we won't have that anymore. We won't have that desire, that lust. That'll be gone, and so we don't need it. But everyone else says they don't believe this premise, and all the other authorities say that we will have sacrifices in the third temple, and that we will have everything like I just described, and it will be very elevating. It will, because it's no different. You have to understand that a sacrifice is no different than going out to dinner and having a spiritual experience. Imagine you go out to dinner with your spiritual guide. You have somebody that's really helping you spiritually, and you go out to dinner with them, and every aspect of the dinner is symbolic of different things and has all these customs and is telling you messages throughout the dinner. That's what sacrifices are. They're not where I'm bribing God by taking this virgin and throwing her into a volcano, and I'm saying, I'm prepared to take this beautiful woman who we could have and use in our life, and I'm going to waste her to show you, God, that I'll do anything for you. Now, give me good crops. That's what the Aztecs, they believe this kind of stuff. They would kill people in order to get good crops. Now, you have many, many stories of these types of things where people were killed for it. And the Torah talks about examples where you had people who worshipped idols. They had the worst one was this one idol that it talks about where the way they worshipped it, it was iron. It was made out of iron, this one, and they would had a opening in the bottom, and they would put wood inside, and they would burn wood inside of the idol, and the idol would get so hot it would glow red because it was metal, so it would glow red. And they would have the priests were all drummers, and they would make this drumming beat and make people crazy, like with the beat. It would like get them all excited, and the way they worshipped it was by taking their children and carrying them forward and putting them on the arms of the idol, which were red hot, and killing the children that way. But I'm prepared, for the sake of our society, to have wealth and success in the coming season, to give up my child for my society. That's what they believed. And that the God wants me to do this. God wants to show, you love me, you should do this. And our God says, one of the worst things that you could do is to offer your children as a sacrifice. It's explicit. Don't offer your children as sacrifices. Don't offer humans as sacrifices. Sacrifices are not sacrifices. They're a vehicle to bring you close to me. That's the difference. And our concept of sacrifices is diametrically opposed to the rest of the world's idea. And I can tell you that because what comes to your mind immediately when I say sacrifice is exactly what I describe as the rest of the world's view. And it's totally different for us. Yeah?
Sorry, but the thing with Korban and Krivan, everything you're describing, no waste, satisfy your desire, where is the benefit, if there is one, to, or maybe there shouldn't be really, can there be a benefit to God in any of this? This is all for the individual to
That's
be
right.
closer. So that
God doesn't need it.
Well, God wouldn't need anything. But,
He doesn't. That's exactly the point.
But there's just all for the individual.
That's right. It's just like, I'll give you an example in real life that I experienced when my father passed away. And I teach people this. You have many rituals that you do for funerals, and they're weird. Like they put a fork in the casket. They put special clothing on the dead person. They put a tallis on a man. Right? They put pieces of china on their eyes, and they put dirt from Israel inside of the coffin. Why? The guy's dead. What's he going to do with the tallis? What's he going to do with pieces? It's all going to be gone. It's all going to dissolve. Probably in weeks it's going to dissolve. So, because it's not for the dead. It's for you and me. It's for you and me. Why he has a fork? Because when we have revival of the dead, he has a way to get out. It's a balsa wood. It'll be gone in an hour. But it's to teach us something. I guess the best example is it says when someone dies. So it says that right after they die, if you're in the room with them, you should open the window. Right? So they open the window of the room so the soul can go out the window. Right?
Yeah.
That's why. Do you think the soul has to go out the window? The soul can't go out the wall. The soul goes out anything. Like, is that really necessary? Of course it's not necessary. But it's necessary for me and you. Because it's a physical act that I'm doing by opening the window. It helps my psyche come to terms with the fact that someone died. I'm now coming to terms with it. If a physical action helps me within me to accept the fact of what's going on around me. And so I'm not opening a window for his soul to go out. I know it doesn't need to.
Psychological benefit?
Exactly.
That's it.
For me. Because it's not in the Torah, it's rabbinic law. All of these things that have to do with mourning. The rabbis had an understanding of the psychological needs of a human being. They needed things like a number of things in order to live, right? To have a healthy life. So, and that healthy life, right, that we have, that it comes through having good psychological health, and these things help us with it. The whole Shiva helps us with it, right? This is just one example. That you close a person's eyes. You do all these other things. You give them the fork so they can come out. You give them dirt from Israel because it says that when people are revived in that time when we come back, the people in Israel come first. So you put dirt from Israel on their coffin, so they're from Israel. So they'll come first, so we can see our loved ones first. But it's not for the loved ones. They're dead. They don't see the dirt. They don't see the fork. They don't see the clothing. They don't see any of it. I do. And it's for me because I'm in grief. My father just died. I've lost him. God took him from me. But God's telling me he's going to come back.
But the Korbanot also helps the Kohanim with the food. Was given to them to be eaten.
Yeah, okay. All right, that's Kohanim. We're talking about in general with rules. So that's really how we see it with a sacrifice. That a sacrifice is, God doesn't want our sacrifices for him. That's one of the main differences. When the idol gods, right, the other gods want the we believe we're bribing them. I'm bribing you. I'm giving you my best cow. Now all I'm asking from you is make it rain. I'm bribing you. We can't bribe God. He doesn't need our cow. We're doing it because the cow is similar to us. It reminds us of a human being. It reminds us that okay, God in His mercy is allowing me to atone. But if this was an animal world, you know, a dinosaur world where there was no mercy, I'd be dead. I broke the rule. So just like that animal's dead. That's the thought that we have. And then we take that and elevate it. We come at a higher level. It's all for us. None of it is for God in reality. Just like nothing's for the dead person. It's all for us.
The book of Hours is showing us as human beings that we are not high enough, that we're humble enough, okay, admitting you did something wrong. Here, God forgive me. Because that's a big thing.
You are, but He's not eating the cow.
No.
God's not getting the cow. That's the question that was asked. Right? Yeah.
Well, along with the Kohanim, I have a saying that God revealed a certain group of people just by the nature of being born into that section that there is like no elitism. Doesn't have to be the jealousy among the other Jewish people.
I don't know. If I inherit, I can promise you I'm not inheriting $1 million. But if I inherit $1 million from my father, are you jealous you didn't inherit money from my father?
No, but that's just
that.
But I'm sure other people, when they see that they're that.
No, but you see, the Kohanim are Kohanim because of the actions of the first Kohen. Because what he did, it wasn't a gift, because for no reason. It wasn't because he was born into it. Aaron Cohen was such an extraordinary person that God gave him a blessing that his children will be Kohanim. It's a gift he's giving Aaron for what Aaron did. It's Aaron's life because he did that. And because of that, they have this privilege / responsibility, not always considered a privilege by them. Sometimes it's just a responsibility. Talk to one who wants to marry a divorced woman. They'll tell you right real quick that they're not so happy being a Kohen. So you have it both ways, but it's not, could there be people who are jealous? I suppose there could be, but the whole idea is this wasn't a just random gift or a gift given because God likes the Kohanim. It's because they deserved it. And it was a gift given to them by the actions of their father, of Aaron. And you have places in the Torah where you have reference to it. Like at one point, Moshe says, after the golden calf, he says, whoever is for God, come with me. Who came with him? The Kohanim. That's who came with him. They stood up and said, I'm one of them.
But the ones that are born into some of them aren't and if they don't live up to that expectation, they don't care. It's by birth. So what do you do with the ones that aren't a good representative of that?
You train them. That's all. It's like anyone else. We don't throw out all the Jews because some of them are criminals. Right? We do our best to try to bring them in, but you can't always. You also had, there were sad stories, like we said before, where a Kohen is a wonderful guy, but for whatever reason, he's born with one leg shorter than the other. He can't practice as a Kohen. He has all the restrictions of a Kohen, but he can't do any of the privileges of a Kohen.
God gave the Kohanim, Kohanim, and He gives other human beings